just start recording and we're going to start this session. So we just finished an informative session with CELPIP listening, and now we have 40 minutes to talk about IELTS listening specifically. So in the past, I have two different classes. They're in our Facebook group for listening strategies and skills. And this is now just a free ask me anything about the listening exam focus. And some of what I'll talk about, I'll probably repeat from the CELPIP because there's similarities between the two exams, but we'll look at CELPIP material and CELPIP questions. So I'll just open it up. Are there questions that you have about practicing with CELPIP or getting ready for your CELPIP exam?
You mean IELTS?
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, yeah, I'm still in the CELPIP mode. So yeah, if you have any IELTS listening questions, then we'll talk about that in today's session.
I have some difficulties with the choosing like the correct answer, the multiple choice question.
Okay.
In some questions, you will see that it's a little bit unclear. I think the last one that I did was Cambridge 11, test number 4.
Okay.
And I found that I repeated the audio to check when I found that I answered wrong.
Yep.
But it's the same thing that happened to me with the reading,
Yep.
if you remember last time.
Yep.
I'll tell you, even when reading the passage, even if I listen again to the passage, actually this one I found that, personally, I found that the three options are okay to choose. I don't know about that. So do you have any tip about that, how to be sure which one is the correct one?
Okay, do you have those questions in front of you? I'll just give him a minute to pull up the questions, because what we talked a little bit about in CELPIP and what we'll talk a little bit here is even before, so when I'm preparing for the exam, I don't want to just be listening and answering questions. I want to analyze different questions to understand what's different or commonly asked. So when I'm looking at 3 or 4 choices, then I want to look at 10 or 20 or 30 different questions, and I start to see a pattern of what's asked about. So it's usually either a main idea or a specific detail, or maybe an inference, what's happening logically. Secondly, I want to look at the question, the answers, and see what's different between them. So when they're similar or close to each other, what are specific differences with the keywords that I understand? If I have some words I don't know, I'm at least going to have to guess on some. But this is an analytical approach of identifying and looking at differences with the questions. And then the third thing that I want to do, and IELTS is a bit easier because you have the listening and the questions in front of you, but you also want to be taking some notes. Now for IELTS, because you have the questions in front of you, what I recommend is you're not writing out full notes, be somewhere else. As you listen, go through the questions and be making little marks. So if one of the answers says 1975 and you hear 1975, put a little check mark. Maybe it's not the right answer, but it's showing, and you're using the questions as your note outline to at least say, oh yeah, I heard this, circle that word, underline that word, put a little check mark. Those types of strategies you want to practice at home before you're doing the actual exam. Tofik, do you have those questions now in front of you?
I have the test, but I don't remember which one of them exactly.
That's okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
So why don't you share your screen, and we're going to we'll just look through some of the questions without doing the listening part of it first.
Okay. Sure. I don't know if it's clear or I should zoom in.
Yeah, no, that's maybe zoom in one magnification, but that for me, yeah.
Like that?
Yeah, that's good then.
Let me do that.
Okay, so for me, when I'm looking through, when I scan, it talked about the theater studies. So let's look at, we'll look at question 21 and 23. So I'm picking questions randomly. So question 21, what helped Rob prepare for a doctor? Okay, So when I'm looking at A, B, and C, the key words, it says grandfather in each one of them. So I need to identify what's different about the grandfather in each one. So is it the stories? Is it his grandfather working, which means his grandfather was a doctor? Or is it how he imagined? So when I identify this, I have two concrete ideas, stories and physically watching. Or C, it's more abstract. I'm just thinking, what would my grandfather be doing as a doctor? Okay. Question 23. What did Rob learn about himself in a group? Clear guidelines, copes well, he thinks he's a good leader. So I'm identifying and analyzing what's different between these, and then I'm thinking back to the listening. Well, did it talk about that he had some stress? Then B would be wrong. Did it talk about how he sometimes was frustrated because it wasn't always clear what to be doing? Well, then A would be right, clear guidelines. So I'm drawing back from what I heard as I look through the questions or as I listen, and then I'm applying different words or parts to that. And if I'm not sure, like if I can't remember, was it clear guidelines or I heard stress, but was it that he did well with stress, he didn't do well with stress? At least I would say, okay, now I've narrowed it down to a choice between A or B. Okay.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're practicing during the exam now. It's not just most students, when they get the exam, they just start listening or the reading part. They just start reading and they're going through and they're not using strategies or principles. Those are keywords, transition signals, positive or negative adjectives and ideas, and then meaning between different choice answer choices. Those are all things that I want to be practicing in my Monday to Friday times. And then when I do an exam on a Saturday or Sunday, I bring those skills together. So for example, we just looked through and identified with these questions. So maybe on Monday, you would go through 20 or 30 questions. Don't even look at the listening. Go through and identify what's different between some of the answer choices. What are some of the key words? What are some of the possibilities? Then on Wednesday, listen, but on Wednesday, listen, but don't look at the questions. Just write down whatever notes you're hearing, either through the ESL Lab website that I've showed you or the exam, IELTS exam practices. And then on Fridays, listen, look at the questions, and then put those pieces together to say what choices I might make. Now you have a system rather than just I listen, I try to answer, oh, I got 30 out of 40. I listen to another whole exam, I try to. That's where you're wasting time because you're not practicing. It's like somebody that's playing a game on basketball every week. If they're just playing the game, they're not improving in dribbling. They're not improving in passing or in making those shots. And that's what I want students to refocus on with skim and scan keywords, transition signals, positive words, etc. And the nice thing is those same ideas are in all parts. When I'm writing, I'm going to have those same parts. I want to read your keywords. I want to read your transition signals, your main idea. When I'm doing the reading section, when you're speaking, those different parts make up each strategy in the exam or part of each strategy. Okay. Okay. What other questions do you have for me?
I might ask you about my current situation.
Sure.
My test, I hope it will be maintained in the 2nd of December.
Okay.
So what did you suggest for me in these 2 weeks to do to maybe improve in general, maybe, but specifically with listening as during my practice, as I told you before, I commit some spelling mistakes, which cause me some troubles with sometimes I remember, I think it was once or twice, I got like the full answers correct. But since I committed too many spelling mistakes, the score was around 6.5, something like that. So maybe you can give me something that might help me.
The same struggle I have exactly too.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, almost all of my students from the Middle East have the spelling problem because the Arabic that you're used to and that you've learned, when you come into English, we have so many words that the E and I, and then the I or the E spelling, the pronunciation is different, or well, we pronounce it, but then the way that you're blending words, it's most of my Middle Eastern students have the exact same problem.
The
So,
problem with me is the French, as
oh yeah, okay, yeah,
some words are exactly the same in English and French,
yeah.
but when it comes to the spelling, sometimes I stop and I start thinking, is it in English like that or in French? And I end up by writing the French word instead of the English.
English
So,
word. Yeah.
yeah,
So with some of that, it's okay because there's a British spelling or an American spelling. So for example, color, center, etc. In Canada, we follow the British spelling. In America, obvious. But for the difference between the two spelling systems, they will accept both. So that part is okay. But
okay,
it's when you're spelling, because we can also tell, is this the word, like, is this person totally have the wrong idea, or they actually know the word, it's just that there's a
yeah.
few letters. But unfortunately, both structures, you still will get it wrong. So a couple of suggestions. Um, there's the most common words in English, and it's a
Yeah,
PDF that I've shared in the past, and I can
yeah,
put it into the chat here, or we can look at it. But it's the first 1,000 most common words. I'm just pulling up the chat. I'll talk and drop
yeah,
it in there. So with this, what I encourage students to do, because these are the easier words, but that are very common in different situations. So what I encourage students to do, first of all, is go through the words, but your focus isn't trying to memorize a whole bunch of new words. What you're doing is just going through and making sure that you're familiar with those words and the common spelling. So that's the kind of the easier, because I don't know what words are going to be on the exam.
yeah,
For the harder, more academic words, what I've found is often in the exam, they've, like for example, in reading, they've said the word in the reading passage, usually about 30–40% of the time, or it's even in a previous question. So there was one reading test I give students, and it has the word endangered is one of the answers, but it's actually 3 questions before that word is written out for them.
yeah,
So that, like, just pay attention and see if that's with listening. Obviously, it's a bit harder because you have the information that you're hearing. Um, I, I don't have a
yeah,
clear strategy. The only thing I would suggest is when you get to the end of your exam, you have 10 minutes to transfer your answers from that information to the answer sheet and hand in.
yeah,
For you guys, what I recommend then is take more time focused on the spelling of the words rather than on the, is this the right word, or was it, was it
yeah,
decade, or was it
exactly.
20 years ago, or instead of was this the right answer, focus on was this the right spelling within that. That's all that I can say, given that you have 2 weeks or 3 weeks
Yeah,
left.
and in general, my first question: what can I do in this short of time
Right.
to, yeah, prepare myself better?
And I've given in the group chat the first 1,000 words. If you're not able to download it or access it, then send me an
I
email.
downloaded.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay, good. I just included, and actually, because the first 1,000 words are pretty clear, and you can probably
yeah,
take 10–15 minutes and look through a 50 or 100.
yeah,
I've just also put in there the second 1,000 words. Those maybe you would take 30 or 50 in a day. You might not get through all of them, but again, you're not trying to memorize vocabulary. You're just reviewing how would I spell some of these very common words.
Trevor,
Yeah,
can I give a comment? What I could
absolutely.
understand, correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
like the main reason for our mistake in spelling is the way how we pronounce. If I will share, I don't know about Tawfiq, but I'll share about
Yep,
my story in a fast way.
yep.
Like I start learn to speak English when my age was around 25. So
Okay.
before that, we used to study all my bachelor degree, it was in English, but
Mhm.
it's like some kind of famous word, which is a key word in my specialty.
Yep,
It's not like the practical English,
yep,
the normal English.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So if I will look at myself, I'll say like I learned more of my English through like my discussion with my colleagues, like Indian background,
Correct.
Filipino background, Chinese, Saudis, Jordanian, Egyptian, all of this, which I could feel it lead to a lot of of wrong pronunciation.
Yep.
Like really, last year I've been to New York, and in New York I speak to them in English, but
Okay.
they could not understand me. Here in Saudi, they understand me easily. Two
Yeah.
days ago, I have American friend. He was talking to the waiter.
Okay.
The waiter was talking to him,
Yeah.
and he could not understand the waiter at all. But at the same time, I understand the waiter totally.
Yeah. I
Even
understand.
he's a native English speaker.
Yeah.
So I could feel maybe the main reason for our mistake in spelling is the wrong pronunciation. As you said, there is some famous letter where we have most of the mistakes.
Yeah. So a couple of things you've touched on there, but absolutely, because when I talk with people from India, from the Philippines, my strength or benefit is I've now taught thousands of students from many different countries in the world, and so with that advantage, I can understand from many different accents. But like your friend from America, he's not used yet to the Saudi accent and where they're putting the words. And actually, even that word in Canada and the US, we often say Saudi, but in the Middle East, they say Saudi. Like your pronunciation of that word has more emphasis on the O sound than on the, I say just the A. So what I would recommend and what I can do is send some links or put them when I upload this, put some links. There's common spelling mistakes. So those are little rhythms or sayings that we memorized when we were kids. There's one that I had in when I was in like grade 3 or 4. I before E, except after C. So when I'm writing words like receive, there's a C in it, REC. Then I know it's going to be EI because that's a little saying in my mind. But if I have the word reign, RIEN, so a king or anyways, I have I and then E.
Yeah.
So there's little sayings that we were taught in school that you guys haven't been access to or thought about or heard. So I'll look for some of those common spelling mistakes, and I think that would actually clear up a little bit because there's probably 8 or 10 main ones that you want to memorize how we spell, and that would probably cover 70-80% of the mistakes that people are making right now.
Yeah, like receive and achieve.
Yeah, yeah, right.
We are always making that mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, receive, achieve. Yeah, that's a good example. So let me look, because I know there's a few websites, I've seen them in the past. I don't focus on spelling as much, but I know in listening it is a crucial element of the IELTS. So I'll look for some of those and find some that have common spelling mistakes that people make.
So just following up on Tawfiq question,
Yep.
when you figure out that you made a mistake when you were speaking during your response, do you recommend going back and correct yourself, or just pass it by and go on with your response?
Good question. So if you recognize it, go back and correct yourself because there's a level of understanding. An intermediate level student will just be speaking. An advanced level student will recognize mistakes and be self-aware enough to correct and then move on. That shows you actually have a higher level of knowledge because you know when you made some of those mistakes. You might not recognize all of them. So during your speaking part, if you self-correct 3 or 4 or 5 times during that 11 to 14 minutes, that actually will show us a higher level of ability in your speaking.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely if you recognize that. And I find so when I analyze students writing or speaking, let's say that I've done 3 or 4 different evaluations of their writing or their speaking, I start to see common patterns. So maybe, for example, for you, you're often having present tense rather than past tense. So
Yeah.
you going into the exam, you have that understanding, and then as you're speaking, the teacher asks you a past tense question, you say a few things in past tense, you make a mistake and flip it into present tense, and then you correct. Oh, instead of saying I am there, I was there because it was 2 days ago, and then you keep speaking. That's more impressive for us because you've recognized it and been able to adjust.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, other questions? I'll take questions on anything, but specifically if there's listening questions, then I can help. And if you want, we can go through some of the part 4 listening passages because those are often the most difficult. And I can talk through what I'm doing when I'm listening and answering those types of questions.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
what about using pros and cons separately? For example, can I use just pros, or just cons separately?
Can you give an example? Do you mean in the speaking part?
Yeah. For example, or writing part. If I want to say concluding the aforementioned advantages, can I use concluding the aforementioned pros?
So you'll have to look at the different sentences. So in that specific example you gave me, pros doesn't fit. We want to say advantages or benefits.
Yeah.
But if you're at the start of the essay, or if you have a different format, so if you said, should teenagers be working? Well, there are several pros to this. As I'm saying it, I think you're better off to write it out. There's several positive reasons why people like this, or benefits or advantages, because writing, you want to be a bit more formal, but in speaking, it would be okay to say the pros, or, well, there's 3 cons that I see to this. It's okay because it's more of a, speaking is more informal.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, any other questions?
No, from my side.
Okay. So I can ask one more question if you don't
Yeah, yeah,
mind.
yeah,
So what
absolutely.
about the idioms? How many idioms should we use? Or is it a rule that the more we are using idioms, the more we are getting grades?
No, the biggest challenge, not challenge, but I often see students either putting in lots of idioms or lots of advanced vocabulary, hoping that's going to raise their score. And my caution is not necessarily. I can say sentences that you won't even understand, but they're not appropriate because I'm in a conversation in the speaking test or in the writing. I watched a video. It was from, I won't say the specific country, but it was an IELTS teacher from an Asian country.
Yeah.
And their writing that they showed as an example, it was full of all of these words that I don't even know what they mean. And I looked at it and they're saying, this gets you a 9. And I'm saying, no, that doesn't. That's showing you might get a 9 in vocabulary, but the content and the explanation is so confusing, you're going to lose marks in those. They would be better off to use simpler information in order to convey the idea. And just as a side note, CELPIP, it's even more important because Canada's had a shift in how we score information. It's are you able to communicate? 10, 20 years ago, it was, do you have a British accent? Do you have an English, ability?
Yeah.
Meaning, do you speak like a native speaker here? Thankfully, the world's recognized there's all sorts of English. There's Malaysian English and Nigerian English and English English and Canadian English. And so the emphasis has changed now into communicative English, meaning your accent might be a bit different. There might be a few words you use that aren't as common that we're used to in Canada or the US, or, flat instead of apartment, etc. But are you communicating your idea with transition signals? It's organized and giving specific details. That's going to give you more, better range because you're marked in several areas. So Tofik, just to recap, the question was, if I'm using more idioms in my speaking, is that going to help my mark? I said, not necessarily. Just because you have lots of idioms and lots of advanced vocabulary, it depends if you're using them in context or not.
But for the speaking part,
This is for the speaking, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
The question.
I remember in a course, a teacher said, don't use items, but use idiomatic speech, if I'm correct. I don't know what he meant, but I think this is like really, really high level. So personally, I won't take the risk to do that. And as I know, you can still score like band 8 without using these items. So
Yeah, correct. And I'm just sharing the screen. One of the advantages I like about the ESL Labs again is when you're going through, so we're under the different passages, almost all of them have a section with idioms. So
Oh
these
yeah.
would show you, like sometimes students say to me, well, which idioms do I use? I don't know because it depends what you're talking or writing
yeah,
about, but I wouldn't use them in writing as much. And in speaking, I would go through, and if you want to, rather than go to a website that lists 200 idioms, because you'll never not sure which ones you'll use, go to these types of exercises and write down, okay, up in the air, travel with something. That's under the topic of traveling. Then go to some of the ones that are in the difficult category. Go through a bunch of them, write down some of the idioms. I would work on my idioms in that format because now you're using them in context rather than just memorizing a whole bunch of idioms that you may or may not use. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So I have a few minutes left. What I'd like to do with you guys is go through an IELTS listening. Um, so whenever I want to find something, like sometimes students say to me, where do I find materials? I always Google it, but the key is, what am I Googling? So with IELTS, I would go through and say, instead of just IELTS listening, I would say the different parts. And you can see here, they even have section 4 strategies or tips, or you can search for section 4 about geography or about hair or about topics. So it's typing in a little bit in Google, and then it will come up with different suggestions. What are commonly been searched in that area? So for me at this point, it has here practice with answers. That's key because I want to make sure I can correct and understand it after. Um, so let me just, I think it was this one, ExamNet. Yeah. So IELTSexam.net, they have the listening in sections. And I talk about this in my videos in previous listening videos I've done. I encourage you, don't just take exam after exam after exam, whether it's reading or listening, break it down into sections and focus and understand and practice listening section 1 for this week and ESL lab. Combine those, note taking, identifying keywords, etc. Then in the next week, look at listening section 2. And then every Saturday or Sunday, do a complete exam, but break it down into parts between that. TOEFIC for yourself, you just have 2 weeks. I still would, like many students I know, they say, well, I'm going to do a listening exam every day. Why? You're going to get burnt out, in my opinion. A faster way is to do today and tomorrow, focus on, or every day, focus on one listening section or one type of question. Search IELTS listening multiple choice questions, IELTS listening fill in the blank questions, and then take a few days and just focus on those types of questions. That will be a faster learning process because you'll get familiar and your brain will start identifying information than just doing test after test after test. So what I do when I get to a listening, I'll just talk through this. We have about 7-8 minutes left. So I find a passage, I can see it's 7 minutes. I'm not going to listen to it first. I want to be using my analytical skills before I go through. So I look at the questions. Okay, Tofik, this one's for you because you have to write down the words. So no more words and or number. So I identify that. Now I'm looking at keywords within the questions. So let me just make this a bit bigger. Okay, so elephants stay together, all. Elephant family groups, so that'll be a definition or word. When scientists track, which feature did they notice? What sense? Over long distances. So when I'm looking through these different questions, these are not easy answers, and I saw that it's a 7-minute recording, but at least I'm getting some, same with reading. When I look at the questions, I'm narrowing down what am I going to be reading for. Here, I'm narrowing down what am I listening for. Maybe it talks about 3 types of animals and it says the first 2 don't stay together all their life, then forget about them. Don't try to stuff those 2 types of, black elephants or white elephants or, whatever the category is. But if it says usually group A and group B stay together, then write those down because I've now narrowed down to some of the key words. So I look through the questions first, identify some of the key words. Then what I want to do is go to the listening. Now, if you listen to all of it at once, that's your choice, but I would even break it into parts. I'd listen to 2 or 3 minutes, go look at the questions, try to answer them, go back to listen to the next 2 or 3 minutes. You can't do that during the exam, but again, don't make it an exam or a game every time. Break it down, practice in sections, then over several days or weeks, put things together and build your skills with that. So let's listen for the first, say, 2 minutes and see what happens.
Section 4. You will hear a lecturer talking about the way in which elephants communicate. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
Okay, are you guys able to hear the recording or is it too?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's good.
It's
So they give
perfect to me.
Okay, so they give us a couple of minutes here, which is good. I'm just going to move the speaker a bit.
Groups of adult
Sorry.
describe some.
So that's what I'd be doing in those 20, 30 seconds. Identify the key words in the questions.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
In today's lecture, I'm going to continue the theme of animal communication, and I'm going to describe some of the latest research into the largest of all land animals, and that is the elephant, of course. Let me begin by briefly outlining the structure of elephant society. Elephants live in layered societies. The basic family unit is formed of small groups of adult females who are related to each other and their young of both sexes. Now the females remain in their families for life. They're highly social, but male elephants.
So they're actually not describing types of elephants. They're talking about males and females. So which elephants stay together all of their life? So far, what I've heard is females or females and young. We would see, but most of the first 3 or 4 sentences didn't even apply. I just ignored it because it's not answering my question.
Leave their families at about 14 years of age. They travel alone or congregate in small, loose groups with other males, occasionally joining a family on a temporary basis. When males are ready to mate, they wander widely, searching for receptive females. The family unit, on the other hand, often contains 3 generations, and it can remain stable for decades or even centuries. Then, each family associates with between 1 and 5 other families, probably consisting of their more distant relatives. Scientists call these groups of families bond groups, and bond groups belong in turn to even larger groups called clans. So
it gets a bit confusing, but they mentioned 2 different words there about elephant groups. What were the words you heard?
Yeah, bond groups and clans, I think.
Correct, yeah. So bond and clan, sorry.
Clan, yeah.
So bond is nice because we all know 007, James Bond, so we should know how to spell that. Clans is a common phrase. So family elephant groups known as, so bonds or clans. Okay, which elephants stay together all their life? That I think still we would talk about the females.
Yeah.
So as I'm listening, because I have the questions in front of me, that's where I'm filtering through. some of that stuff I'm not even paying attention to, I'm not writing down. I'm just looking at which are the ones that are going to answer my questions. Okay, let's see if they give us the answer for the feature of behavior. Did they notice?
Elephants have a complex social structure, and like other social animals, they have to be able to communicate. But what baffled early naturalists was their ability to communicate over long distances. So they set about researching this question. In one experiment, scientists fitted groups of elephants with radio tracking collars, and what they observed about their behavior really intrigued them, because they found that there was some sort of coordination between families. For example, two separate family groups might move in parallel to each other, miles apart, and then change directions simultaneously, either turning or moving towards each other. Now, elephants have a key.
Okay, this is getting a bit confusing because she talked about this and then she talked about the feature of behavior. So they kind of introduced that they communicate and then they said which feature of behavior did they notice? And did you guys hear or catch what they talked about?
Collaborating.
Okay, yeah. So collaborate within groups or collaborate uh, together. Because I have to think of something that is no more than 3 words and or a number. So they
Yeah.
haven't talked about the sense yet, but they did talk about how they're uh, working together.
Keen sense of smell, which they use whenever they can. But smell alone couldn't account for these synchronized movements, because the wind often carries odors in the wrong direction. So the scientists concluded that the elephants were using their hearing instead, and attention then turned to the nature of elephant calls. In another
Okay. So there they've answered the sense, and then you see how they've transitioned into talking about elephant calls. So this is where you're analyzing those keywords for that 30 seconds at the start. That's going to help you as you're listening to use that as your framework as you're either taking notes or listening in order to go through the different parts or sections.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there for today. I'm just looking down what tips do they give. Yeah, so they have a listening tip within that. If you can't choose, then write both answers down because they might be something that helps you later. Then they have matching within these sections. Okay, and then the nice thing, I chose where it gives you the answers. So when you choose check answers, that's where it will help fill those in. So those are the kind of resources you can find online where you don't have to be going back through paper. You find it, go through, answer what you think it is, and then check your answers and you can see what those choices are. Okay. What I would do, I'll end off with this advice. What I would do with reading and with listening, go through it once, answer your questions, go through it a second time, and if you think that any of the answers are different, write down a second answer, then go and check your answers. And what this will help with is if you got it wrong the first time, it might be that you're not sure or you missed it. If you get it wrong a second time or a third time, that means that you don't know the answer. And that for me is more important because when you don't know the answer, it's probably because the vocabulary you didn't recognize or it's confusing, like here, where they talk about communication and then they jump up to the other part and then they go back down. So when I'm looking and going through those parts, I want to identify or just see, did I get it wrong because I didn't know it? Or did I get it wrong because I wasn't sure um, the first time, but when I heard it a second time, then I did. I have the knowledge, I just didn't recognize it the first time through.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had a good overview. I think you guys have had some really key questions that have been helpful to for us to go through. And I'll end off this session. As I mentioned, we'll have a conversation talking about business plans and resources for Canada specifically. There's lots of information. I'll show you trustworthy websites for looking at resources for starting a business and making a business plan in Canada. But thank you guys for joining for today with IELTS Listening. In the next day or so, I'll put the links, the PDFs, and the video into those units that I talked about so that it's easy to find in our Facebook group.
Thank you so much. Thanks
Thank
for
you
your
so
time.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
See
Bye
you.
bye.
Thanks for joining.